Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Federico Blanco. I'm the head of the Research and Evaluation Unit of the ILO. And I'm here together with my colleague, Nicole Petrovsky from UNICEF to present the result of our joint latest global estimates of child labor, which were published on the 11th of June of this year. I would like to remind you that there is interpretation available in French and Spanish, and you can press on the button as shown in the slide to get this interpretation on. I would like to, before moving forward, just to say that it's a pleasure to be here with you today in this joint undertaking of ILO and UNICEF. This is the seventh edition of the global estimates of child labor, which that we have produced. It covers trends from 2000 to 2024, which were updated every 4 years. This report tracks global progress on the elimination of child labor and hazardous work and highlights some of the key characteristics and patterns that we observe over time. Um, it tracks on the specific objective of eliminating child labor, establishing the Sustainable Development Goals, Target 8.7, and we were supposed to achieve this target in 2025. Therefore, these global estimates bear particular relevance. Um, Next, please. It is important to understand what we mean when we talk about child labor. Child labor is not all work performed by children. It's work that is detrimental and targeted for elimination. This is the measurement framework that we use in the global estimates, in which we have been consistently using since the year 2000. We start by measuring a broad measure of economic activities of children in the target age group from 5 to 17 years old. And this includes all the production of goods and services and for the market and the production of goods for self-consumption as well. That's what we call in this context children employment. Then we measure hazardous work, which is a worse form of child labor, particularly detrimental to the health, safety, and morals of children as per Convention 182 of the ILO. Within hazardous work, the components of hazardous work include hazardous occupations by children, hazardous industries such as mining and quarrying, construction, and long hours. Those are the basic three criteria that we use for the measurement of hazardous work. If a child is in hazardous work, it's in child labor. If a child is not in hazardous work, we look at the age ranges. Any child who is in employment by this definition in the age group from 5 to 11 is automatically classified as in child labor. For children who are 12 to 14, we look at the hours. If the child is working 14 hours or more per week, he or she is classified as in child labor. And if it's working less than those numbers of hours, is in light work. And then if children 15 to 17 are not in hazardous work, they are not in child labor, they are legally entitled to work. We also, in the bottom left-hand side, have a box that is called hazardous unpaid household services, which is household chores, intensive household chores that are equally detrimental to children in terms of their capacity to benefit from the education system. These tasks are mainly done by girls in many societies, and therefore it's important to have to have a gender balance analysis and include them in our estimates. Next. In terms of methodology, the primary data source that we use is household surveys. We use representative household surveys, in this case, 107 national household surveys, which represent about 60% of the global population of children from 5 to 17 years old. We basically use all possible sources of data that we can identify, including the very important multiple indicator cluster survey from UNICEF, national child labor surveys conducted with ILO support, but also there are other surveys which like labor force surveys or other multipurpose household surveys that include information on working children for different age ranges. We use basically all the sources we can. In this particular global estimate, the data, the reference period includes data from 2020 to 2024. And nearly 90% of all the surveys we use are within this reference period. Next. Now I'm going to present the levels and trends. This is the key result of the global estimate and the global snapshot on how we enter into 2025, the year that we were supposed to eliminate child labor. And the reality is that still we have 138 million children who are currently in child labor and 54 million children in hazardous work. So the key message of this slide is that we have not achieved target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is what is important about this slide. Also, in terms of prevalence, we have about 7.8% of all children 5 to 17-year-olds in child labor, which is about 1 in every 13 children in the world, and 3.1% in hazardous work, which is about 1 in every 32 children in the world. These are the trends. The last global estimates cover the period from 2020 to 2024. And what we can see in these last 4 years is that clearly we have returned to a path of progress, a positive trajectory with a reduction in terms of prevalence in absolute numbers of child labor and of hazardous work. We had the initial concerns that the COVID-19 pandemic could significantly increase child labor, but this new data confirms that this increase did not materialize. Instead, we have achieved substantial progress with a reduction of 22 million children in child labor. But it is also interesting to looking at the long-term trend from 2000 to 2004. And what this trend presents is a story of hope and progress. Looking at the last 25 years, child labor has dropped by more than half, representing approximately a reduction of 108 million children since the year 2000 to the year 2004 in child labor. And this is in a context where the global population of children has increased by 230 million, making this result even more significant. Next. This is scenarios looking forward. We have a number of scenarios that we will present to you. But what these illustrate is the acceleration that is needed to eliminate child labor by different target years. The progress that we observe is encouraging, but in order to attain target 8.7 of eliminating all child labor, we need to move a lot faster. We need to if the target was going to be achieved by 2030, we need to move 11 times faster the current pace of progress. By 2045, 7 times faster than the current pace of progress. And by 2060, 4 times faster than the current pace of progress. So there needs to be a significant scale up in our action on child labor if we're going to eliminate it. And it's likely to be a problem which is going to accompany us for the decades to come, unless we achieve this scalability of action and reduction. Next. Now I'm going to present regional levels and trends. And what we observe as a snapshot in terms of region is that the prevalence and the numbers are very different in different regions of the world. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest prevalence with 21.5% and the largest absolute numbers with 87 million children in child labor. So Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa have more child labor than all other regions combined and represents the epicenter of the global problem at the moment. But the problem is present in all other regions as well, to a different scale, but still significant. We have the, the region of Northern Africa and Western Asia with a prevalence of 8.3%, Latin America and the Caribbean with 5.5%, and Central and Southern Asia with 3.4%, and Eastern and Southeastern Asia with 3.1%, and the correspondent absolute numbers below. Keeping talking about the the trends, here we have trends, not the absolute figure, but the trends, and we observe the prevalence in absolute numbers for 3 major regions in the world. So on the right-hand side, we have the prevalence since 2008 to 2024 of Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia and the Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. What we observe is that in all of these regions in the last 4 years, we have achieved a reduction in terms of prevalence, and this is very welcome. In Africa, this reverses a long-term trend that we had since 2012, where there was an increase in 2016 and 2020. So the results of 2024 are particularly welcome. And what is going to be absolutely critical in Sub-Saharan Africa is to keep progress going, is to keep bringing these prevalence rates down. In Asia and the Pacific, which is the darker blue, we achieve a very significant reduction in terms of prevalence from 5.6% to 3.1%. This is the largest drop ever recorded in this region. It's about 45%. It's very significant. So the results in Asia are quite extraordinary. In terms of Latin America and the Caribbean, there is a more modest reduction than in Sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia and the Pacific, yet a reduction of about 0.5 percentage points. When we look at the absolute numbers, we observe first that Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa and absolute numbers remain constant at 86.6 million children between 2020 and 2024. And the reason for this is the demographic shifts, demographic changes. The population in Sub-Saharan Africa is increasing. Therefore, even if we achieve a reduction in prevalence, which is very important and very welcome news, this is not sufficient to bring the absolute number down. In terms of Asia and the Pacific, we observe a sharp reduction of about 21 million, which makes that most of the observed reduction at the global level is actually coming from Asia and the Pacific. In the case of Latin America, we have also a slight reduction from 8.2 million to 7.3 million children. Next. And here we present some scenarios looking at what would happen if the prevalence remains constant at today's levels. And this is what you have in the first scenario. What would happen given the demographic increase in Africa is that um, the numbers in Africa, which is the darker blue, will increase. Even not increasing the prevalence, not reducing the prevalence, but just keeping it at the same levels that we have today. In Asia and the Pacific, we go from 28 million to 20, keeping the prevalence constant. And this is because the population of children is contracting in this region, similar to Latin America and the Caribbean, which we observe at the top. However, if the current pace continues, if we observe the current pace of progress that continues and continues until 2060, we're gonna achieve a reduction in terms of absolute numbers. Yeah, still the problem is gonna be concentrated largely in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, but the numbers would be much lower in a very optimistic scenario that is that we observe from now on the fastest pace that in each of these regions that we have actually observed in the past. And this would lead to a much more significant reduction of child labor to about 30 million children in the world. So this is absolutely feasible. It's paces of progress that we have observed in the past. So we hope that this scenario is the one or one even better that could happen in the future. I leave the floor to my colleague Nicole from UNICEF. Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Federico. So now let's dive a little deeper and take a look at who are the children, what is the profile of children in child labor today. So this first slide is showing the percentage distribution of children 5 to 17 that are in child labor, broken down by regions, by SDG regions, and by national income groupings. So we can see that the age composition of child labor varies quite considerably, both across regions and across national income groups. So on the far right is the world total. So you can see overall about more than half of children that are in child labor are the youngest children, so are children aged 5 to 11 years. And then about 1 in 5 children who are in child labor are young adolescents, 12 to 14, and then the remaining sort of 1 in 5 are older adolescents, age 15 to 17. But then when we look at the regional breakdown, we can see that this pattern differs, of course, across regions. So the vast majority, over 2/3, of children that are in child labor in sub-Saharan Africa are the youngest children under the age of 12. But when we look across the different regions, we see that the proportion of children or the distribution of children who are in this youngest age group is below half in all of the other regions and spread out across the different age groups. So it's very heavily concentrated among these youngest children, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. When we look at the progress that's been achieved in reducing child labor, broken down by age groups of children, we see that the progress has been quite a bit slower and more uneven among the younger children. So it seems to be especially difficult to reduce child labor in among the youngest children. So on the left-hand side, you have the both the prevalence and the absolute numbers of children 5 to 11 in child labor. The middle chart shows also the prevalence and the absolute number of children 12 to 14 in child labor. And the chart on the right is the prevalence and absolute number of adolescents 15 to 17 in child labor across the years for which we have trends data. So going from 2008 to the latest 2024. And you can see, of course, in the middle chart and in the right-hand chart, the drop in the prevalence as well as the absolute numbers is quite significant for adolescents 12 and above. But for children that are 5 to 11 years, we see the prevalence has gone sort of up and down. So it's been a bit of an inconsistent pattern over time in terms of the prevalence as well as the absolute numbers of children in child labor among the youngest group. When we look at the intersection between age and sex, so looking at the percentage of children in child labor broken down both by age and by sex, we see that as children get older, child labor tends to become progressively more common among boys than girls. So in the youngest age group, that 5 to 11, the prevalence of child labor among girls and boys is essentially similar. It's more or less the same. But once they hit that sort of early adolescence period of 12 years and older, we see pretty significant divergences in terms of gender disparities starting to emerge. So we see that boys become more likely to be involved in child labor as they hit adolescence and move throughout the adolescent periods. It becomes especially pronounced in the older adolescent period of 15 to 17, with boys being about twice the level, having about twice the level of child labor compared to girls. But of course, an important caveat is that the previous slide was showing the measurement of child labor according to children's involvement in economic activities, not considering the involvement in hazardous unpaid household services, or commonly referred to as household chores. So when we take into account household chores, we see a slight shift in terms of the pattern when it comes to gender disparities, where the pattern essentially reverses a little bit, and we have a slightly larger share of girls than boys involved in child labor when we account for their involvement in household chores as a component of child labor. So this chart is showing the percentage of children 5 to 14. So instead of 5 to 17, it's 5 to 14 because of data availability about household chores in child labor for the different age groups, and also further broken down by sex. And so you can see here the lighter blue bubble is when we consider child labor including household chores, and the darker blue is when we consider child labor excluding household chores. And you can see the levels for girls at all ages and overall for the 5 to 14 years it's slightly higher than boys. Now let's take a little look at some of the characteristics of child labor. So where is child labor most likely to occur? So most child labor still is primarily concentrated in the agriculture sector, although we see that the relative share does tend to diminish as children get older. So this chart is showing the percentage distribution of all children 5 to 17 that are in child labor broken down by the sector of economic activity, age, and sex. So the dark blue is those that are involved in child labor in the agricultural sector. So you can see here that overwhelmingly at all ages and for both girls and boys, again, it's most child labor is occurring in the agricultural sector, but that again, the sort of relative share of that and how it contributes overall to the profile of child labor diminishes as children get older. And once they hit that older adolescent period, we see a more significant um, uh, proportion of both girls and boys that become involved in industry and in services. This is essentially the same chart, but now showing the regional breakdown. So again, child labor is overwhelmingly agricultural, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, but it tends to occur outside farming in other regions. So again, we see in sub-Saharan Africa about 70% children that are in child labor are engaged in agricultural work. compared to the other two sectors, which is much lower. But in some of the other regions, the patterns shift a little bit. So, for instance, in Latin America and the Caribbean, about 46% of children that are in child labor are involved in the agricultural sector. 16% are in industry, and 37% are in services. So the regional patterns and the regional distribution of where child labor is occurring does vary across regions. Now let's take a look at hazardous work. So when we break down hazardous work, we see that it does occur among children of all ages, but it is primarily concentrated among the older adolescents, so the 15 to 17. So we have about 10 million, or about 1 in 5 children 5 to 17 that are in hazardous work are the youngest, so are 5 to 11 years. We have around 13 million younger adolescents, 12 to 14, who are in child labor that are also in hazardous work. That's about 1 in 4. And then we have more than half of all children who are in child labor and in hazardous work that are of that older adolescent age. So almost 31 million, and more than half. When we look at where hazardous child labor is happening, we find that it's really not confined to any single sector. So you can find hazardous child labor in agriculture, in industry, and in services. Um, Overwhelmingly, you can see that hazardous work tends to be pretty common among within the industry and within the services sector. So almost, for instance, almost half of all child labor and that's occurring in the services sector is classified as hazardous work. Um, about 2/3 of child labor that's happening in the industry sector is considered hazardous, and about a third when it comes to agriculture. In the new report, we also do some analysis to look at what is the impact of child labor on children's ability to attend and succeed in school. So what we found is that, of course, child labor dramatically increases the likelihood that a child will be denied the chance to go to school. So this chart is showing the percentage of children 5 to 14 years not attending school overall for the age group, and then also disaggregated by the sex of the child and by region. So overall, we see that about 31% of children in child labor are not attending school. 47% of children that are in hazardous work are not attending school, and this is in comparison to 8% of children who are not in child labor and not attending school. So children who are involved in child labor, and of course those who are involved in hazardous work, are much more likely to not be attending school. Overall, we see, of course, the same pattern when we look at girls versus boys. So, but we do see, of course, the levels are a bit higher among boys. And when we look at it by region, again, we see a similar pattern that, children who are in child labor and not attending school, the levels are very high. For instance, in Asia and the Pacific, 42%. So almost half of children that are in child labor are not attending school. We also find a similar pattern when we look at the older adolescent period. So this is very much similar chart to the previous one, but looking at the percentage of adolescents 15 to 17 who are not attending school by whether or not they're involved in child labor. So overall, 14% of adolescents who are not in child labor are not attending school. And this is in comparison to 59% of adolescents in child labor who are not attending school. So adolescents, again, who are in child labor are much less likely to be out of school and to not be able to continue in their education. In the latest report, we were also able to do an analysis looking at some data coming from the multiple indicator cluster surveys for a subset of countries, a subset of 34 countries that had data on both child labor, as well as had collected a module about foundational learning skills. So this is a module that's embedded as part of the multiple indicator cluster surveys. And it's a direct assessment that the interviewer conducts with children between the ages of 7 and 14 years to essentially assess some of their foundational reading and numeracy skills. And we were able to cross-analyze between the two indicators. And what we found is that children in child labor are also less likely to demonstrate foundational reading skills. So not only are children involved in child labor impacted in terms of their ability to attend school, but we're also seeing that those who are in school are also and are involved in child labor are also being impacted in terms of their outcomes, so their ability to demonstrate some of these basic reading and numeracy skills. And now I'm going to hand it back to Federico to wrap up and give us some points on the road forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much. So the report includes some limited policy discussions. The report is not a policy document in itself. Nevertheless, the global estimate is so important that it gives us the opportunity to reinstate and reinforce some of the broad macro level policy imperatives that are needed to end child labor. The main message is that there is no simple standalone child labor project that would lead to progress at the scale which is required. Rather, what is needed is the integration of child labor into a whole range of policy areas that we know to be relevant to child labor. The policy imperatives, and I want to repeat this, are extremely clear. We know what needs to be done. What needs to be done includes ensuring free, high quality schooling, at least until the age of compulsory education, strengthening legal protections against child labor, including the ratification of international conventions, including the adoptions of a list of hazardous work that are prohibited for all children, including mainstreaming child labor supervision into labor inspection systems, equipping the education systems as well to support the school to work transition, a school to work transition that that is sound and that respects sufficiently the prerogative of children to benefit from the education system. We saw that there are many children in the world that are in child labor that are not attending school, and for those children that are even attending school and are working at the same time, there is an interference that affects their learning capacity. Social protection, absolutely essential, especially when we saw previously in the last 4 years, what happened to COVID. Perhaps one of the keys of not seeing child labor going up today is the fact that in many regions have developed strong social protection systems that are targeting children in our age range. This is absolutely essential. It reduces vulnerability of households, the vulnerability of households, which in itself is a root cause of child labor. If households feel that they are vulnerable, if they are uncertain about the future, one trigger, one rational measure that they can take is send their children to work to counteract this vulnerability and uncertainty. We need to expand access to basic services. I'm talking here certainly about health services, but also about basic services such as access to safe water and to electricity. A lot of children in the world are involved in fetching water, in collecting firewood in rural areas. Things that are not, and there are millions and millions of children that are involved in activities of fetching water and collecting firewood. So this is also very important. And definitely combating child labor includes the issue of supply chains, um, business operation and supply chains. We usually tend to focus on the lowest tiers of the supply chains, but violations of child labor can exist across the supply chain, and we need to have enterprises and societies in general looking at all tiers of the supply chains. Also, in terms of priority, as we have seen, it is absolutely essential to focus on young children. We see that we haven't achieved the same sort of progress in the age group from 5 to 11 than in the other age groups, 12 to 14 and 15 to 17. And also hazardous work. Hazardous work is an area where there is no much debate. Everyone agrees that this needs to be eliminated as a matter of urgency. Actually, Convention 182 on the worst form of child labor, hazardous work, is a worst form of child labor, has been universally ratified. And this entails a very strong commitment to our of countries to tackling this worst form of child labor. Next. There is also, while these policy imperatives are very clear, what we need to do is very clear. Um, the mix of what needs to be done depends of the local context. The determinants of child labor might not be the same in one country than in the other country. And therefore, that is why we need data. We need the evidence-based policies at the local level and even at a subnational level. In many regions of the world, we are starting to develop with our national counterparts risk models that go to lower levels of disaggregation to see really not only the national picture of the regional picture, but the subnational picture. Mobilizing resources is very essential as well. As we see the scale of the challenge. We need to move much faster than what we have done. And for that, we need a strong resource mobilization, including uh, foreign development assistance, but also resources mobilized at the national level. Um, and finally, we need to work together. No single actor is capable of eliminating child labor on its own. It's a global movement that includes every single one of us, civil society organizations, governments, employers, workers, NGOs, um, academia. All of us are needed uh, to, 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 to really be able to tackle this phenomenon that is persistent. We have observed this significant reduction, but how persistent in time this phenomena is and how it is likely to accompany us unless some dramatic changes are included in the next few decades. Thank you for your attention. And I think that we open to questions. I give you back the floor, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Federico. So yes, now we can open to questions. We have about 20 minutes to take questions. I think some have been coming in, so let me just take a quick minute to scan through the chat, as well as
I'm also
the
scanning.
Q&A. Let me see. Okay, I'll take a couple from the Q&A. So I see there's a question asking, is there data on what were the most significant factors in reducing child labor over the past 25 years in Asia? I don't know if you want to respond.
Do you want me to address it or?
Go ahead,
So,
Federico.
so basically, we provide in the report a series of correlates um, that we know to be closely related to child labor. I'm talking about GDP growth, poverty reduction, social protection or coverage for children, primary education enrollment rates. We see a consistent trend in Asia and the Pacific and in Latin America and the Caribbean since the beginning of the measurement where child labor trends have been going down. These are the regions in which economic growth has been the strongest, in which there is larger coverage of social protection, in which the education expansion has been more significant. So these are at the global level and at the regional level, there are these factors. There are important progress as well that is achieved in sub-Saharan Africa that has been achieved, but yet the levels are very different. And that's what that implies is that there are still very significant challenges that explains the persistence of child labor in sub-Saharan Africa with poverty levels at a rate of 36%, as well, very limited social protection, very encouraging trends in terms of education indicators, but yet the levels are different. So those are the kind of explanations we provide that we provide in the report. Obviously, that there is nothing more difficult than to explain a global trend or even a regional trend. What needs to be done in order to do that is what we do sometimes in the context of our cooperation with countries is in detail determinate analysis using national data to understand what are the driving factors of child labor in a specific given context. As I said before, it could, we know that access to services is important, that poverty is important, that decent work of parents is important, that economic shocks are important, like including conflict, including natural disasters. We know all that, but in a given setting, the relative importance of those determinants can be only explored using data from that specific setting. Um, so that would be my initial answer. I don't know, Nicole, if you want to supplement this or.
No, I think that's great. It's very comprehensive. Okay, I can take the next one. I see there's a question about the availability of data disaggregated by children's disability status. Of course, the measurement of disability is quite complex. There is a UNICEF and the Washington group have developed a module that assesses child functioning status, and it's a module that can be integrated and used as part of household surveys, so it can be included in surveys like the multiple indicator cluster surveys, like the MIX, and has been. In surveys that have implemented and collected both this child functioning module as well as information about child labor, there is the possibility to cross-analyze and look at those two indicators together to explore, what proportion of children that are involved in child labor have a functional difficulty. One of the challenges is about low number of cases in a lot of the times when we're looking at crossing these two, because of course the prevalence of those with functioning difficulties, it tends to be on the lower side, which is what we expect. So we didn't in this latest report look at child labor according to children's disability status, but it has been explored in other UNICEF reports. So there's a 2021 report that was published by UNICEF, which was a global report on children with disabilities with the latest available data. And actually, there's going to be a new updated version of the global estimates coming out in the next couple of days. There'll be a webinar actually tomorrow, hosted by UNICEF to present the latest global estimates overall of children with disabilities. So this analysis has been looked at, but outside of the context of this report. So it has been explored in through other analyses and through other types of reports. And we can also I can put a link to some of those publications in the chat. I see there's a question about whether begging was begging both by children with and without disabilities was accounted for as a component of child labor. So I'll let maybe Federico respond on that. Thanks.
So basically, the main framework for the measurement of child labor, uh, for the statistical measurement of child labor, which is what we do here, is the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. And there is a resolution on child labor statistics that establishes how to go from the conventions to statistical indicators. And child begging is mentioned in this resolution. Begging in itself is not an economic activity, but in the context of the topic of child labor, it can be definitely considered as a worse form, especially because third parties are using many times children to beg on their behalf. So they are sort of control in this activity. In the global estimates, we have not included this. It's a very specialized topic, which is not even necessarily, we are not even necessarily able to capture with the household surveys. There is research that has been conducted with our support. For example, some capture and recapture uh, research to estimate the number of children begging in certain parts of the world. And also, that doesn't mean that the global estimates exclude children who are begging. If children who are begging are also working in something and they respond and they have a household, because these are household surveys, this is based on household surveys. So if children are, for example, living in the street, they are not covered by this estimate, which is important to understand as well. So this is not treated in this research is definitely very important. It is recognized in the framework of the measurement of child labor statistics, and other methods perhaps are more amenable to understanding what is happening in a given setting. I mentioned the capture and recapture, but also qualitative methods could be better than to understand this very important topic.
Okay, thank you. See another question saying, is there a comprehensive analysis of outcomes of national action plans implemented by countries in sub-Saharan Africa? It was expected that national action plans would be integrated in addressing all key areas affecting child labor. Has this happened?
I wouldn't be in a position to tell you this, but definitely there are different policy frameworks, and national action plans on child labor are one of them. Um, the more integrated these frameworks are among themselves, also with other existing development frameworks, the better the synergy that could be achieved. National action plans are important because they have a more refined, sometimes approach towards the problem. But again, as we said, there is not a national action plan in its own who will eliminate child labor, but perhaps by developing these considerations in more detail in a national action plan and integrating this into other national development frameworks, you could achieve a better uh, result.
Okay. Now there's a question about thoughts around what should be done on the intersection between child labor, agriculture, and the informal economy.
I mean, the majority of child labor takes place in the informal economy. virtually all. And that is why we see these trends in the group of children from 5 to 11, because there is a larger proportion of these children uh, working in agriculture. Agriculture is the entry door for children into child labor. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why we observe these persistent trends in the group from 5 to 11. On what to do, there needs to be, there are many things that can be done. Okay, I will mention just one, which is formalization and decent wages. Um, we need to try, and there are many initiatives in the ILO regarding the formalization of employment in the agricultural sector as well, where people are paid decent salaries, and with these decent salaries, they are able to sustain their households. In many settings, how are people in the agricultural sector paid? They are paid by piece rate, and where there is no control, they have lots of incentives to bring the family along, uh, whether that is in a tenancy system around an agricultural product, that is that is a reality. Therefore, there needs to be formalization. There could be um, policies also to increase productivity, mechanization of the agricultural sector as well, to reduce the labor intensive and the incentives of workers to use family members as well. But everything is connected, including things that are absolutely outside of the labor market, such as the importance of education in rural settings as well. Sometimes children might be working because the education alternatives are not strong enough for them and for the families to be attracted to the education system. So there are many things that are connected to this topic that should be analyzed, but it is a very important topic.
Yeah, and I see there's one sort of comment in reaction to that, also mentioning about strong unions as well, to advocate for these types of changes like formalization and increased wages. So that's a good point as well.
Yes, perhaps that's a very important point. The synergies between the different fundamentals. We were talking about disability. Discrimination is related to child labor. Now we're talking about freedom of association and collective bargaining, which is also a fundamental principle and right at work. This is connected. As people are better organized, they are better able to make their rights be heard. They are better able to negotiate and to obtain decent working conditions that will, in turn, benefit their families and therefore make less likely that child labor exists. This is well established, the importance of this of freedom of association and collective bargaining and association in general as a deterrent of child labor. Over.
Mhm. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left, so we'll try to get through one or two more questions. So I see there's a question referring to the disaggregated data and what is the highest contributor to the overall, I'm assuming this is referring to the overall global reduction. So I think, as Federico mentioned, of course, the region where we've seen the strongest progress has been in Asia and the Pacific. So it definitely, as a region, contributes is the greatest contributor to the overall global progress that we see, because of the sheer sort of scale of the progress that's been achieved in that region, but also, of course, the size of the population that exists in that region, having, two of the world's most populous countries. There was also a question about determinants of child labor, which I do think Federico touched on, and whether we did any analysis to look at other determinants of child labor going beyond the ones that we, featured in the report. So I think Federico was mentioning the fact that we didn't include it as part of the presentation, but yes, the report includes also a look at some other determinants and correlates of child labor, like poverty, primary school completion, GDP, for instance. So we did try to look also at trends in some of those indicators as well, broken down by region as possible, like, correlates again and determinants of child labor. So some of that is also presented in the report as well at the regional level. Of course, we were constrained in trying to focus some of the analysis with the report because in order to also keep the report streamlined and digestible with some really like key high-level messages. So of course, it's a topic that we could have gone on and on for hundreds of pages and produced much more analysis and much more in-depth analysis on many different aspects of the issue. But again, because it's a global report and the focus was really on presenting current levels and trends at the global and the regional level, we made some decisions about streamlining and focusing some of the analysis. But of course, there's much more in-depth analysis that could be done. Um, Maybe I'll just take one last question. So there's a mention about um, the lower tiers of the supply chains. And do you think that a focus on direct business partners in due diligence at the exclusion of indirect partners will increase child labor? I don't know, Federico, if that's clear, if you want to answer.
I mean, let's be clear. Child labor exists in different tiers of the supply chain. It's very difficult also to capture um, the supply chain problem in itself. So we know because we do service at the sectorial level that child labor is more present in the lowest in the lowest tiers of the supply chain. That doesn't exclude that it happens in other tiers as well. It actually does, but to measure it is really difficult. Um, what we support, meaning the ILO mandatory due diligence of businesses in, there is a discussion of voluntary versus mandatory, and voluntary has generated great practices, but we think that it is really important to that this due diligence is done systematically by enterprises. So I don't know if that answers your question. Um, yeah, we support that.
Okay, so I think we're at time almost, and I think we got through most of the questions. Apologies if we missed one or two. I just put in the chat a link to the report on the UNICEF website, which is data.unicef.org. Also, everyone who registered for the webinar will get a follow-up message with links to the recordings of the webinar as well as to the slide deck. So you will get that in a follow-up email. And we just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. And also thank you to our partners at ILO for the collaboration on this report. It's been a wonderful journey.
Mm.
And we are really so thankful for the collaboration and for everyone's time for joining us today. So on behalf of UNICEF and ILO, thank you so much for joining. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.